I've been asked, how do you present a biblical view on homosexuality? I mean, it seems to me, in terms of the content, that's quite simple. There are two things to keep in mind. The biblical view on the value of human beings and the biblical view on the conduct of homosexuality. So the first one is that human beings are made in the image of God and therefore deserve respect and kindness and tolerance in the classical sense. However, that doesn't mean that we disregard God's moral directives regarding certain behaviors. And the moral teaching on homosexuality is very clear in the scriptures. Between the Genesis passage on Sodom and Gomorrah and the Levitical passage on homosexuality and also the Romans passage, Romans chapter 1, it becomes very, very clear that God's view of homosexuality is that it's a deep moral harm. Leviticus calls it an abomination, and homosexuality is a crime under the theocracy that deserves capital punishment. Now, I am not suggesting that's the case now, that is, that should be punished in that way. That's not my view, because we're not under a theocracy anymore. But I think that does tell us something about God's perspective about that particular thing. And we're not just restricted to the Leviticus passage or the Sodom and Gomorrah passage. We also have the passage in the book of Romans, which God makes very clear that homosexuality is a violation of the natural order that he created. In other words, and here you have to go to the New American Standard Bible, I think, for the crispest and clearest characterization or translation of this. But the problem there is that men and women in their homosexual behaviors abandoned the normal function of the two sexes. So God created opposing sexes, opposite sexes, to function in a certain way with each other. And here we're talking about plumbing when we use function language, not about desire. And since homosexuals abandoned the function of the opposite sex that God has created for them, then God then gives them over, basically, to this immorality. And this is the wording of Romans chapter 1. The most important thing is, from all of those passages, we get a perspective of God's understanding of homosexuality. It's wrong. Now, this is wildly politically incorrect, and you have to be careful how you characterize these things in public. What I try to do is I usually start with God's moral perspective and then add, but this is what God says about how we treat people. So there is no justification for anything like gay bashing, given the scriptural evidence, the total communication by God about man. And this is what people think when you say what's wrong. Of course, we don't bash other people with other sins just because we think they're wrong. So there's an inconsistency here. But in any event, God makes it very clear in both cases that homosexuals are human beings that need to be treated as such and with such respect, but also that homosexual behavior itself is wrong. And homosexuality is an example of a deep rebellion against God, and that's in Romans 1.